Hello, this is going to be the first of two videos looking at building my Steampunk Proton Pack. This is part one, which is looking at the Neutrino Wand that is sometimes referred to as a proton gun, but Neutrino Wand generally the preferred term. So in this video I'm going to sort of take you through the techniques I use for building. Now I have sort of a bit of a style of building that is very much unplanned, that I know doesn't suit everybody. So this is sort of the planning I'm doing. Now bearing in mind I'm not trying to do an exact prop replica here. I'm just trying to make something that looks unmistakably like it's a proton pack. Now I'm making here just a template out of card to allow me to create two bits for the box part of the Neutrino Wand. Now part of what I'm doing here is I'm trying to use up stuff that's was already in the workshop. Now that's because I built this all during the 2020 lockdown. So this was the first lockdown, so nowhere was really open for me to go out and get sort of supplies for doing this. So I was just using whatever materials I had to hand in the garage and the tools that I already had. A bit later on I did sort of some stuff I did order off the internet in the end, but yeah, I mean this is just very roughly cutting out these bits of plywood to size. I'm not trying to be too precise here because what I'm doing in the end is just taking it down more precisely using the belt sander. Now this obviously just sort of allows me to completely square this up after the fact, so I wasn't too worried when I was sawing it. Got the two bits there clamped together so that I can sand them together and make sure they are a pair. Now again, just squaring bits up here. What I ultimately ended up doing here is I wanted this to look like the box was made out of oak. So what I ended up doing was taking this plywood, which is just sort of a standard hardwood ply with like the red face sort of veneer on it, and then I sanded through that red face veneer on the belt sander to then expose like the layer underneath, which is kind of like a white sort of colour, which would then take wood stain very well. Now my method for sort of assembling all of this is to use PVA glue and then sort of pin nail each joint so that it sort of gave a very strong bond. And then I'm pin nailing this here. Again, I'm not too worried about getting this 100% in line because I'm just gonna square it up on the sander afterwards. All I need is for it to be the actual joint to be square. I'm not too worried about sort of a little bit of overhang on the edges, and yeah, so I'm just putting, say, PVA glue and then putting these little pin nails through, punching the heads below the surface, and you can start to see that this is bringing together that sort of what I'm calling a box with sort of one side chopped off that forms sort of the main bulk of the Neutrino Wand. So again, just nailing it together, punching the heads below the surface, and now we're starting to smooth it all up using the sander. So this is just creating that flat face. Now on that flat face there's going to be a little removable panel. So again, this is just using what I had in the garage. This is one of these sort of brass plant sprayer type things, cutting it down with the aim of using the two halves of it for the front and back sort of tubular part of the Neutrino Wand. So just chopping through that, taking it in half, and then I needed to cut this down purely to get the fitting off the end, which I needed to thread back on to the main body of the sprayer. That was the only reason for doing that, yeah, because I needed that bit. Then I'm just boring out. I think this was threaded inside, so I just needed to bore it out to so that the threads wouldn't catch on the electrical wires when I fed them through. And then I'm boring out the holes through the actual box part just using hole saws. So that's holes in both sides. There we go. So that's obviously bored out to fit that. Then I'm extending those just using some bits of 22mm copper pipe. This is just sort of push fitted, and then I wick sort of super glue into the joints, which I'm just doing there. So that's just wicking some glue into the joints to hold it all together. And yeah, all these bits, various bits of copper pipe, which are to just, I say, to extend the length of this these tubes, so that that could work. Now we're just completing the box. Now you can see now that I've completely sanded off the red sort of face that was on the plywood initially, down to that white, sort of whiter under layer. And that's with the aim of using that sort of white underlayer as a basis for then staining for making it look like oak. So this is just sort of aligning the bits that we're going to go round the front part of the wand. So again, same techniques, just PVA glue. Yeah, don't put PVA glue on with your fingers. It's a bad habit that I've gotten into. I know that PVA glue doesn't sort of affect my skin at all, so it's not something I'm likely to stop doing, but it's not really best practice. You should really use a brush or a spreader, but yeah, I don't. This is sort of partly why I do put the disclaimer on these videos, but that and not clamping things properly, which I admit I am terrible for doing, but yeah, don't do as I do. But yeah, so this is again same techniques, just gluing, nailing, and we end up with a box that is interesting. Here with this sped up footage, you can see everything move across the bench as I do that. But yeah, punch the nail heads down below the surface, and then I'll put some filler in those generally, which is just a sort of a standard plaster-based sort of wall filler, because I know it will then take wood stain. There we go, a bit of that that sort of cheapy plaster-based wall filler. Fill in all the gaps, and then I'll just sand it all smooth once it's hardened. But yeah, so this is the box part of it. This is probably most of that together now, and then things will hopefully get a bit more interesting as we start sort of putting some more of the details onto it. So yeah, so that's the now this piece is attached with screws, and that's so I can gain access to the electrics that are going to go inside if anything does happen to fail in there. I generally do that. I try not to bury wiring in things, because electrics do fail. It is kind of what they're best at doing, especially on something like this that's going to be transported to and from events. So now I'm just drilling out the corners for cutting a square slot, which I'm cutting on the scroll saw. And this is going to be to fit. Now on the actual Neutrino wands, they have like a sequence of LEDs in there for the power levels. Now what I'm using instead, which you'll see me wire up later, is a linear VU meter. There we go, so that's a linear VU meter. So it's basically an analog moving needle meter where the needle is cranked over at the end. They're quite an interesting looking component when you use them on something like this. But then I'm just boring out for some switches. So there's going to be two switches on this, one of which I'm calling like an arming switch, and then there's like what I'm calling the firing switch. So one basically puts the power level right up and operates some lights on the pack, and then the other one actually turns the really bright light on in the end of the wand. Now these that I'm putting on the side here, or I'm looking at putting on the side, they're the little synchronous motors out of central heating valves. So like a valve actuator motor, but if you sort of strip them down, they look quite an interesting component. Then we're finishing the sort of giving the finish to the box using some Rustin's Dark Oak Wood Stain, and yeah, just sort of it's just applying it with a rag. Put a couple of coats of that on, it gives a nice sort of oak finish. Then I'm going to clear. Well, I normally clear lacquer it. In this case, I'm using some polyurethane varnish, I think, because it's what I had. Because again, lockdown, couldn't get out and buy things, so it's what I happened to have in the garage. But yeah, this so this is just sort of giving its varnish over. And this is in the little spray booth that I set up. If you've seen my sort of workshop tour, you'll see where this is. But this is the workshop before I did a lot of work on improving it, so some of the benches and things look different. But I'm now, yeah, emery paper to just fetch some of the corrosion off because it was too big to do the vinegar bath, which is what I normally do. And then polishing up on the Dremel because it's before I had the proper polishing wheels. So then the gaffer tape wrapped around it is purely to just bulk out the pipe. Then that's just that little copper thing I'm putting on there. It's a copper bucket, miniature copper bucket that I got from a charity shop. It looked like possibly something that somebody had made in like a metalwork class or whatever. But adding that to this, it sort of gives it a bit of that, gives it a bit of a look like one of the sort of old brass and copper sort of fire hose nozzles. So it just sort of adds a bit of something to it, makes it look a bit more than just a copper pipe. So yeah, we're now looking at putting the switches into the front panel. Now there's going to be some switches in there, and there's also going to be some sort of potentiometer knobs. Now the potentiometer knobs, I don't use them for anything. I am considering wiring one of them up to in line with the VU meter, so I can use it to kind of adjust the power level. But at the moment they don't do anything. They are just they don't even have potentiometers behind them. They're just sort of bolted onto some machine screws pushed through from the back, so I can turn them and look like I'm fiddling with it if I'm at events or whatever. But that little bulb thing there in the top's like an old sort of vintage panel light, which I just like the look of. I did end up swapping the bulb out for an LED because the bulb did have quite a current draw on it when I metered it. But the LEDs hadn't arrived, so at the time I'm just sort of connecting it with the bulb in it. Now I'm just sort of positioning, drilling holes, well, marking holes, mounting things, and just trying to put something together that's got the right sort of look, because this is all about just getting something with the right look. I'm obviously not trying to, as I said before, I'm not trying to replicate a Proton Pack. This isn't an accurate replica, it's a steampunk reimagining. So it's just trying to get components that have the right look. So that's just that VU meter, as I said, which I then wrap a bit of copper tape around it, and that's purely just that copper tape to just so you can't see that it's just clear plastic all the way down. It's just to hide that edge, so that when you see down into it, it looks like it's got a bit more to it, sort of thing. But yeah, and then we're just going to have to add all these bits onto here gradually, trying to decide which bits to use, which bits look best. So that went on one side. That's a cooler out of a laptop. Again, just with the copper heat pipes and things, it just has that right sort of look of a bit of sort of the kind of equipment that they have on the actual Proton Packs. So now we're adding that little copper bucket, again, we've bulked it all out with gaffer tape, and then we're just adding a load of hot glue behind it to just fix that into place. And yeah, just adding all these bits with glue and screws and however I can attach them, basically. But yeah, so I say this is the Neutrino Wand. There will be a second video in this series, which I'm hoping to get uploaded shortly, which will be the actual Proton Pack itself, which it'll be a similar length to this, but it's just going through the process. And yeah, so That's getting that laptop cooler on, and I think then we have to start adding some other bits to the sides of this. So yeah, that's just running a bit of super glue in to hold on this little bit here, which is some vintage cable clips I'm using to hold this in place, which is a little shutter button, remote shutter button for a camera. Just gives a different sort of style of switch, just to put up to the top, and just looks a bit of something different. That's the thing, which is just gives things to fiddle with on it when if I'm doing if I'm at events or whatever, to make it look like I'm doing something important with this. So now I'm looking at getting some bits of soft leather cut, which are to wrap around to hide the copper pipes and to also give me sort of a comfy hand grip on this, because realistically I am going to end up holding this a lot, especially sort of, as I say, at events or whatever. I'm going to end up holding this, carrying it around, waving it about. But so I'm cutting these bits of leather. Nothing really beats just sort of offering it up. No amount of measurement can beat sort of just offering something up and checking that it fits. But yeah, the whole build ended up very heavy. The Proton Pack's not too bad when it's on the back. This Neutrino Wand is very heavy to hold, really. You wouldn't want to sort of hold it with your arm extended for a long period of time. Holding it in your hand or in two hands is absolutely fine. It's not too bad. It can be mounted on the pack. I used a couple of the big sort of magnets out of PC hard drives. One on the back of the Neutrino Wand box and one on the side of the crank generator on the pack. I can take it off the pack while I'm wearing it. It's very difficult to get it back on again, but I have been able to do it, and it's certainly, if I've got somebody guiding me where to put it back on, I can do it very easily. But trying to do it on my own and get it back on isn't too easy. But it works, it's effective. The magnets, the strength on those magnets, this is never going to fall off unless somebody really bumps into it, sort of thing. But yeah, so now we're on to doing the electrics for this. Now there's more on the electrics, including a circuit diagram, in the second video. I generally don't want to sort of go into too much detail on this, other than to say that I'm sort of tinning wires, tinning terminals, and then just mating them together. There's a lot of people on YouTube who do a lot better job of soldering than I do. I can solder, I can do electrical work. I don't like working with things like surface mount components because I just find them too fiddly. But when I'm sort of soldering up old stuff like this, it's a joy to work with, because everything had such chunky terminals back then that it's really not difficult to solder to. Whereas sort of if you start trying to solder onto these little bits of PCBs and that you get from like ordering little modules from eBay and that, they can be a bit of a nightmare to work with, really, because the terminals are so fiddly, and you can risk sort of overheating other components. But this kind of stuff I'm very happy doing, just soldering wire together, soldering LEDs with resistors and that. I might put a link in the description to a little chart that I've got showing what resistor values to use for different LEDs for different voltages. You can calculate them, but it's far easier to just sort of make up like a chart for the different LED types. I've got one that I put together that I regularly use. You might see me pull it out in some of my videos when I need to check a resistor value. But yeah, this is all run on 5 volts because I wanted to run it on a mobile phone power bank. But there are other ways of doing things. You can do them on power banks. You can do them off 12 volt sort of RC car batteries. That's one that people often do. But if they need the higher voltage, you can also get buck converters to convert down from 12 volts down to 5 volts. You can also get boost converters to boost up from 5 volts to 12 volts, but they generally are quite current limited. But yeah, generally I try to keep things all running on 1 voltage. It just keeps things simple. I usually put a bit of heat shrink over any joints like this just to stop anything shorting out, especially in something like this that I'm going to be, carrying in my hands, waving about a lot, potentially jostling the wiring. It's a good idea to just make sure everything's secure. I also generally use a lot heavier gauge wire than you really need for the currents that it carries. Again, that's purely personal preference because I find that it gives you better reliability because it's harder to pull and snap and pull joints apart and that if it gets tugged or jostled in the wrong way. But yeah, so this is just a mixture of LEDs and switches, and as I say, there is going to be a circuit diagram shown in the second video, but this is pretty much built now. All I'm going to be doing is finishing soldering up the LEDs, shoving all that back into there and screwing that panel on. So here we have a few photographs of me wearing the pack, holding the Neutrino Wand, for you to just have a quick look through. Now, if you like this content, please like the video. Please subscribe to my channel. I will be doing more build logs. I'm trying to get better at filming the stuff that I'm making, and there will be more to come. Thank you very much for watching.